All right. Thank you guys for joining the Realty One Stop Mastermind group. Tonight, we're going to talk about due diligence. So this has been on the list for a while, something that people have asked about and wanted to talk about. So I want to kind of look at this topic from a couple different angles. So, and Eric, I'm glad you're here too, because you can definitely help guide us through this as well with your thoughts. But when we talk about due diligence, residential, commercial, obviously they're a little bit different, but they have a lot of the same kind of boxes that we check off as we go. Um, and the way I look at it, I guess, from the agent perspective, is we kind of work through the contingencies of a contract, and due diligence is going to be a big phase of working through those contingencies. So for anyone unfamiliar with contingencies, you typically have your inspection period. When you're talking about commercial property, during that inspection period, you're going to also have a time frame that's dedicated to doc review, meaning you're getting leases, you're getting financials, you're getting any other records that you may request or they may have. So it's going to be a little bit different than residential. Obviously, residential, you're typically just doing like physical inspections. If it's a rental property, you may be doing some minor kind of surface level financial review, calling utility companies, things like that. But part of the due diligence phase is going to be where you are dedicating a specific amount of time for documents. And the reason why we typically do that is because you don't want to pay for a physical inspection if all the numbers you're working off of on like a pro forma that's usually provided by the broker or the seller are inaccurate. So you want to be able to take the time, especially on larger like multifamily or other commercial types of real estate, you want to be able to take the time to review financials before you spend potentially thousands of dollars on physical inspection. So the way I do it as an agent and as an investor, I try to like offset those timelines a little bit. So for example, I might do a 10-day or 14-day document review. This is going to be situational depending on the time of the type of property, right? If it's 100 units, there's going to be a lot more financials to dig through than if it's a duplex. So that's going to dictate a little bit of your time frame. But I try to make that a shorter amount of time than my physical inspection period. So depending on, again, on the property, inspections could be as little as 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, 30 days, whatever. Typically, the bigger the property, the longer you'll have for physical inspections. But again, I personally kind of look at through the lens of like a real estate contract. So, we have our purchase price, we have our inspection period contingency, then we have any other contingencies that may spawn off of things we find during, that due diligence period. So maybe you find issues with their accounting, maybe you find issues with, for example, something I've seen is a property manager will give you a rent roll, and then you find out that, it was 6 months old and 8 of the 20 tenants have moved out or whatever, right? Things are going to come up that cause discrepancies that then could alter the perceived value based on the actual performance of the property. So again, you get into some of that more nuance on bigger deals, but I know a lot of the people in this group and people who may be watching this later want to get into those bigger deals. So I wanted to make sure that we highlight some of those points as well. If you get through the due diligence period and the physical inspections, then you're going to move into your financial contingency, where you're going to have an appraisal. Typically, you're going to have possibly other documents that have to be provided to the lender from the seller. And if you get through that and everything's good and you have a conditional clear to close, then you're going to have the title review done if it hasn't already been done. And then you can set up your closing. So those are all the kind of just typical contingencies you're going to have in any standard contract. One of the things I wanted to highlight, though, and anyone who bought real estate in the last couple of years knows that your market conditions are going to heavily dictate what you're able to do in this due diligence period. So what I try to call like a pre-strategy, meaning before I even offer on a property as an agent or as an investor, I want to know what are the market conditions. And what I mean by that is, is this an A-class neighborhood that's going to get 50 offers, right? That's a massive factor. Or is this a property that's already been sitting on the market for 60 days? Some of the properties right now that aren't priced right, we're seeing them sit on the market a little longer. And the reason why that matters is because that's going to really facilitate the strategy I use when I'm writing my contract and writing my offer. So obviously, if a property's been sitting for a while, you're going to have a lot more leverage when it comes to asking for very specific and strict due diligence periods. If it is a hot property that was just listed in a great area at a great price, you probably have little to no leverage, and as many of you probably know, a lot of the properties that were sold in the last few years had no inspection contingency, no appraisal contingency, no financing contingency. They were cash buyers. I mean, I sold multiple properties as a buyer agent and as a listing agent that had no contingencies in the sale at all. So again, that's going to be heavily dictated by the market conditions. The market we're in now is starting to go more towards a balanced market, but because inventory is still so low, there still is, it is favored towards sellers at this point, but it's more balanced than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. So again, I call that the pre-strategy. You have to look at the whole picture of the deal, right? And that should help you dictate what are you actually going to ask for as you write your offer. And if you guys have any questions at any point, feel free to chime in. But again, it comes back to the leverage. If you have a ton of leverage, if it's a property that's been sitting, they didn't price it well, there's a lot of defects on the property, that's going to help you cater your offer accordingly to that. So let's just say now you get a property under contract, you're actually in the due diligence phase, and some of the things that you're going to want to do are, like I mentioned, if it's a commercial property or a rental, especially a larger multifamily or commercial property, you're going to want to request document review. So you're going to get a copy of all the leases. You're going to get their P&L. You can request tax documents, so like Schedule E's or K1s, which show all their breakdowns that they reported to the IRS the past couple of years. A lot of times lenders want copies of that as well, especially on commercial property. So a lot of brokers and sellers are kind of going to push back on that. They don't want to release their tax information, but typically a bank's going to want to see that anyway. Again, though, market conditions are going to dictate, right? In 2021 and 2022 and even like the second half of 2020, a lot of brokers were not playing ball. They're like, no, figure it out. Tell the bank we're not providing it, whatever. And because the seller had 20 offers, they had a lot more leverage to kind of be a butthead about it. But you should be reviewing all those documents. You want to try to match it up to your assumptions you made. So when we're underwriting the deal, even before we make an offer, we're going to have to make certain assumptions about a property. We obviously know that they're going to provide typically some sort of pro forma, or you're going to develop your own pro forma based on the market. But part of the due diligence period, the purpose of it is we're trying to verify things that we're assuming, because you're never going to know everything before you get a property under contract. So I've heard people say this, and it's kind of a philosophy I try to live by. It's like, when I'm looking to buy a property, I'm looking for all the reasons why I want to buy it. Once I have that contract in hand, I'm looking for all the reasons I don't want to buy it. So you kind of got to completely flip your strategy and your mentality if you want to be thorough and do a really good job during your due diligence phase. Every situation, every property is going to be a little bit different. So you guys know that I buy stuff that's really heavy rehabs. Most of the stuff I bought have been like full gut renovations. And when you buy properties like that, due diligence is less important, because I'm going in with the assumption that I'm going to be doing structural repairs. I'm going to be rewiring. I'm going to be replumbing. I'm going to be putting a new roof on it. I'm probably replacing windows. So it's like, do I really need to go through it with a magnifying glass to tell me everything I'm already assuming? If you're in that situation where you're buying a very deep rehab, my strategy is I assume I'm basically doing a full rebuild. And then when I find things as I'm doing demo or renovations or whatever that are actually good, that's just kind of like a cherry on top. That's kind of the way I underwrite those deals. It's like, okay, I strip all the plaster off and all my framing's good. Or, oh, hey, this half of the house was already updated electric. Good. Those are things I'm not going to have to now go through and redo, but I'd already budgeted, to do them. Right. So, that's kind of my strategy on the really deep rehab stuff. But when you're buying things that are more mid-level rehabs, or even turnkey stuff, that's when you want to be really, really thorough in your due diligence, because if you're buying something with the assumption it's turnkey, and this is one of the biggest mistakes I see most investors make. You buy something with the assumption it's turnkey, and then the next thing you know, you got a $50,000 rehab on your hands you didn't plan. And now the value doesn't support that because you bought it under the assumption that it was you're paying relatively full market value. You're assuming your return based on that value and based on the income. And all of a sudden, you have a massive out-of-pocket expense. So in my opinion, the more complete, the more, the better a property shows, and the less you're assuming you're going to do to it, the more thorough you need to be on your physical inspections and your due diligence. Assuming you get through all that, obviously, again, we go through the financing period. I haven't seen a lot of issues with financing like this last 6 months. Most properties are still appraising really strong. I think appraisers, for the most part, understand that there's still not a lot of inventory, at least here in the Cincinnati market. So I'm not really seeing a lot of super low ball appraisals. But I think that's just a fact that we have low inventory. So buyer demand is still really high. I think there's less buyers in the market, but there's way less inventory. So proportionally, it's still a pretty competitive market for buyers. Some of the biggest issues I personally have with due diligence is buying, let's say you're going to buy an off-market property. I know a lot of people in this group are looking for off-market opportunities. The challenge I've found with them is that you're typically buying, or at least in my experience, I'm typically buying from elderly landlords looking to retire. Most of the landlords I bought properties from keep like almost no records, like no repair records. They have no idea how old anything is. And they're not trying to like deceive you. They just don't know. I mean, some of the people I bought from were in their 80s. Like they just don't care. They don't know. And their sense of time is a little bit skewed, because like for them, it's like, oh, I just put that roof on. Well, then you like find out it was like 35 years ago, but for them, like, I know that sounds weird. I'm not trying to be like ageist, but it's just, I've noticed that pattern with people. It's like, oh yeah, we just replaced those windows not that long ago. And it's like, it was like 1980, and it's like, okay, well that was 50 years ago or 40 years ago. You may not realize that. So just things to be cautious about, especially when you're dealing with off-market older landlords. A lot of times you have to do the legwork on documents. Like, so for example, I've literally had to sit down with landlords who I'm buying property for off market because the bank wants something, right? I have to give the bank something to demonstrate income. Well, they don't keep records. They may not report their income to the IRS. So I have to literally go through the leases. If they even have paper leases, half of them don't. And I have to make a rent roll. I have to make a pro forma, and then I have to submit that to the bank. So these are some of the things I've had to do during my due diligence periods where I'm physically doing all the legwork as a buyer just to make a deal happen because, again, if they're in their 80s and they're moving to Florida or they already have a house in Florida and they're just selling off a couple properties or whatever, they don't care. They're not going to spend days, putting together all this documentation. And the way they look at it is it's like, hey, you want to buy it? Especially if you were marketing to them, right? Like you're the one calling them, mailing them. They're not going to lift a finger to necessarily get the sale done. So again, things I've ran into in the past, especially with off market. Yeah, I mean, as far as like personal, probably my first deal was my worst deal as far as due diligence. I just didn't know what I didn't know, and I way underestimated that rehab. I was not nearly as comfortable with renovation budgets and things like that. I just assumed I could figure out how to do things, whether I knew how to do them or not. So if you're a newer investor and you don't have a lot of rehab experience, that's definitely something to be aware of, that just because it looks easy on TikTok or YouTube doesn't necessarily mean it's easy in real life. And so you have to kind of determine, especially as a new investor, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to try to do? And the things you aren't willing to do, you need to make sure you budget them accordingly. Or you'll end up in a situation like I was, where I had my first deal. I hired bad contractors. They took my money. I had no money left to rehab. And now I'm scrounging around trying to get a renovation done so I can get it leased out. with like literally no money left to my name. So you don't want to end up in that situation. Which is a side note, you probably want to have more reserves. Don't do what I did and spend every single penny you saved on down payment. Make sure you actually have some extra cash set aside or access to cash, whether that's a HELOC or private lender or something. But that's kind of my overall strategy, the way I look at it as an agent, as an investor. I'm sure there's things I didn't cover in detail, so feel free to jump in with questions. But that's kind of the overall picture of how I view due diligence, how I try to work through it. Obviously, it can get extremely complicated on big deals. I've sold some like 100-unit properties that were like massive due diligence. That could be literally 60 days, depending on the deal. So, yeah. What questions do you guys have? Has anybody had a deal where they missed something on due diligence that really burn them, or that they're concerned could burn them in the future? Any horror stories that you want to talk about? Eric, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
But yeah, what about you? I know you sold a ton of bought and sold a ton of flip properties. What about you?
Not one that I missed. I had a flipper that I worked with for a while. He locked up a property he was super excited about. Numbers were like insanely good. So we always did videos as soon as we locked up properties. I opened the front door and I like literally took one step into the house and my foot fell through. I mean, like literally through the floor joist and everything. And I'm like, it was on a crawl. I'm like, that's weird. So I called the slipper. I'm like, hey, I'm not gonna take a video. You need to have somebody come out and check it. He's like, I walked it, no problem. So it ended up being the house had termites, and we ended up selling it as a teardown. Luckily, because he bought it for such a good price, he didn't lose anything. But like literally, all 4 exterior walls were crumbling. All of the joists, everything, just like completely obliterated. And like the contractor went in and he's like, yeah, I'm not touching this property. He's like, I'm not having one of my guys go in this property. Like literally everything was just gone. I was like, dang.
So he hadn't started work on it yet, or he had started work?
No, he hadn't started work.
Oh, okay.
So like most, I'd say almost every flipper we work with, we never do inspections unless it's on septic. Because septic's like the only thing we can't really get a good gauge. And just openly, I know a little bit about septics. I know just enough to be dangerous, but I don't know enough to actually do anything useful with it. When it comes to actual scopes of properties, I'm pretty on point with it for the most part, just with how many we've walked. So, like a lot of the due diligence periods for a lot of my investors, they'll have me go in. I'm definitely not anywhere close to Joe, I bet, on numbers, but I at least fall within a comfortable range, and then I run it conservatively to try and help them out.
Yeah.
I've got an interesting due diligence story that right now I'm proud of, but we'll see as the future goes forward. If you guys remember, I had a single family under contract that didn't end up working out a couple months back. The reason why is because, well, they provided me a termite inspection that said there was no signs, but after looking under the drop ceiling, we found the main beam was actually ate up like by termites and like disintegrating. It was one of those types of beams where it's wood and then it's surrounded by iron or some type of stabilizer. So the inside was wood and the inside was just crumbling out. So I said, I'm not doing this unless you guys, counter negotiate. Let's bring it down, because I didn't, put an offer in knowing that this main beam was ate up by termites. Well, it didn't work out. It looks like it just sold for 30 grand over what I had it under contract for. So maybe they knew something I didn't, or maybe they took the due diligence a little less deep. But fingers crossed for those people, for sure.
I'd say right now with the stuff we're seeing offers wise, it's probably just somebody who's like, I can make anything work number wise.
Yeah.
Well, and I think part of it, I didn't really touch too much detail on like what when you're looking at a property, you're looking at your offer, you're looking at what are you going to ask for as far as due diligence. I think what you plan to do with the property again is going to be a huge factor in developing, like I said, that kind of pre-strategy. It's like if you know, like, okay, so for me, I know I'm going to buy stuff and typically my plan is to hold it for 50 years or whatever, right? It's just kind of an arbitrary number I throw out, meaning I have no plan to sell it unless something crazy happens. So with that in mind, I have to look at a super long view, right? Like I don't want to buy stuff that was built in 1890 if I don't think it's going to stand for another 20 years. So that gives me a couple options. I either have to buy stuff that was built in 1890 that is still in really great shape and the bones are incredible, or I know I'm going to go in and do significant foundation, structural, whatever repairs, like you're talking about Gage with the beam. I know I'm going to go in and all right, I'm going to have to replace this main beam, which we've had to do on some of my properties. So it's like that is going to help you dictate your strategy, knowing your long-term plans. If you're flipping and you're trying to make it look pretty and get in and out of it, I'm not saying you're trying to screw somebody over, but as an agent, I've seen a lot of really bad flips, and most flippers want to do enough to sell for the maximum value they can without getting into, with as minimal cost as they can. That's the nicest way I can put it. And so when you're a buyer buying a flip property, you have to be really cautious and you really have to do your due diligence, because if there are mistakes or things that weren't done correctly, that's when you're gonna, you're gonna be the one stuck holding the bag. So again, having that plan with specific properties will help you go about it in a logical way.
I think for due diligence too, depending on, at least on the residential side, I'm not as familiar with the commercial side. And this just happened about a month ago. I had a flipper that bought a house and then had me go in after he purchased it. And he was just looking for some design options, nothing more than that. And I'm walking it in the basement. I don't know if Joe ended up getting it or not, but I ended up sending Joe some messages. I'm like, this is hard. Like, this is a knob and tube, right? And I mean, the entire house was knob and tube. And he had somebody walk it with him, this flipper, who's didn't point it out or say anything. So, to his surprise, he had to replace, he was planning on flipping it. He had to replace the entire house. All of it was knob and tube. So, I'm sitting there having a conversation with him and it's, hey, what's this cost? And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you for sure, because I don't know if you're going to have to open up all the walls and stuff. I gave him a good idea. And he's like, well, that kind of like kills the profit on it. I'm like, yeah, like this is something you should have seen when you were walking it previously. So, whoever you have walk the properties, make sure they know what they're doing or looking for. And I'm not even saying I'm the best at it, but
we have two agents here. How often are you seeing this kind of like pig on a blunt or lipstick on a pig on these flips where they're just throwing LVP, repainting it, but leaving the things like the knob and tube in there for these like majority
happen. Yeah. I mean, it happens all the time. This guy was actually buying it off market to flip it. So it wasn't like he didn't do it on purpose. He didn't know any better, but he had somebody that he trusted to walk the property with him. He actually had a contractor walk the property with him too. And I immediately was like, you cannot use that contractor. Like, you cannot, if he missed the fact that the entire house is knob and tube. Like, I'm like, I won't touch it on the resale if you have somebody who can't identify knob and tube throughout an entire house. But the lipstick on a pig, I would say, is probably half the rehabs I've seen, maybe even more. And it's what Joe said. I think it's more of just when people are flipping properties, it's how can I make the most amount of money with the least amount of effort and money going into it.
Yeah, at least half. I will say that in the last couple of years, they seem to get a little bit better. Like when I first started selling houses, and even like as a retail buyer, so I bought my first house like 12 years ago. When I first started buying, half the houses I looked at, like coming out of like the last recession, were getting flipped. And they were horrible. I mean, absolutely horrible. Like, you know, trim, you know, an inch off the floor, like not even like meeting in the corners, like looking, I mean, like paint, like everything, like literally ceiling, wall, and trim is all one color, and like paint runs. I mean, like horrible quality, like unbelievable quality. Now, granted, I was buying at a pretty low price point, but still, it's like, dude, this is like not even Weekend Warrior type of like bad. So I feel like things have gotten better since then, like, you know, going 10 years fast forward. But like, I mean, if you recall back then, like that was literally like the heyday of like this flipping infomercials. You know, if you stay up till 3 a.m, they were like always selling a course. You know, they'd like, and that was like the people that were flipping. Like, you know, I remember like my previous in-laws flipped a house and like had no idea what they were doing, like no clue what they were doing. I think they lost like 20 grand on it, but they were the type of people who would do the work I'm talking about. So yeah, it's gotten better, but still probably 70% of flips aren't done well, I would say. And I don't know, maybe, you know, being an agent and a contractor and investor, maybe I have a higher, I'm more critical of people than an average buyer might be, but you can tell when somebody takes pride in it and when they don't. And unfortunately, a lot of contractors don't. So
Yeah.
Angelo, what about your house? Have you found in the new one, have you found any more issues than what you had planned?
No, not really. I mean, we knew that we had some knob and tube, right? So we knew that there was a possibility that we were gonna find more, and I actually found more, right? But I kind of knew that going into it, and um, I basically came up with a plan and I'm executing it, and that's going really well, right? But everything else actually worked out really good. And even with, I mean, from a structural standpoint, the house is pretty solid. The basement's pretty solid, and I do work with a few structural engineers. And she actually used to own a house just a block away from here, and she's like, "Oh, I know that area really well. I'll swing by. Let me check it out." And she blessed it. Everything was great. Um, but again, in my case, even though I had the cash, if I wanted to contract somebody out to replace the knob and tube, the extra knob and tube that we found, um, I'm doing it myself just because I'm house hacking it, right? But if this was supposed to be something that I have to get rented out and I'm missing out on cash flow, then I definitely would have been paying someone, right, to correct that. Now I can tell you that even like that property that we walked down a couple of weeks ago, I'm a lot more comfortable now with it. Um, I would actually consider buying another property with knob and tube. It's really not that complicated, but it goes back to what you said. What are you trying to do with property, right? Are you just going to paint it and rent it out? Or are you planning on opening everything out and just start fresh, right? You just got to know that from day zero, really.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's so. Angelo and I looked at a property a couple weeks ago in Norwood, and the problem with it was what I call those kind of mid-level properties. And what I mean by that is like it didn't need a full gut rehab. Um, it had some imperfections, it had some problems, but part of the problem was you could rent it at a really good market rate as it is, but you're not going to get like the A quality tenant. You're probably going to get like a C quality tenant or even maybe go Section 8. But the difference between the as is condition rent and current market rent was a very minor spread. But the problem is to get from the current market rent to that top of market rent with like an A quality tenant, which is kind of my philosophy, right? I want to have the best property with the best tenants. You would have to spend a lot of money. So, you know, you're already 80-90% there. And then you have to spend a ton of capital to get that extra, you know, 15-20%. So those properties are really challenging. And that's kind of the conversation Angela and I had at that property, because it's like, honestly, it'd be better if this was like 50% there. Then you could get it at a price that would make sense to go ahead and do that work to make it 100%. Hopefully that.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I mean, and and of course from the pictures I was thinking, well, it doesn't really need a whole lot of work. It's in Norwood, you know, an up and coming area and all of that. And it needed a lot more work. But, you know, am I gonna spend $100,000 just to get me some class A type tenants, but only raise rents, a couple $100, cash flow a month makes no sense from a cash on cash standpoint, right? But no doubt that's so true.
Yeah, and that's why, my personal strategy is I like the crappiest properties I can find in the best areas, because then I know I'm going in and I'm touching everything and it's all going to be the way I want it. And I had to get that. The challenge, though, aside from the deals themselves being challenging, is I had to get that at a price that allows me to do that. That's
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Like if I wasn't house hacking this property, I would just rent it out. I have the other side rented out and I heard it a tenant, right? But it rents out just fine. And I'm just below market rent anyways with that tenant. And there's no doubt in my mind that I can get market rent even with the few deficiencies that I have out there. So
yeah. Yeah, and one thing like Angela's deal that reminds me is like when you're walking properties, you're going to get a really good sense of how that owner takes care of them, right?
Mhm.
Like when you're walking a property and the tenants are hoarders, and there's deferred maintenance everywhere, and there's roaches and there's bed bugs and there's whatever. I've seen all that stuff. That tells you what type of owner and landlord it is, because a really quality owner who's on top of their business is not going to allow it to fester in that condition long term. If they have a problem tenant who's causing problems, breaking stuff, whatever, they're going to get them out. They're going to fix it up. They're going to move a quality tenant in. So it's like, those are the things as you guys get more and more experience, you're going to start to pick up on. And so like in Angela's case, the building he bought, and I told him this right away. I mean, I probably said it 100 times. He probably got sick of hearing it, but I walked in, I'm like, man, this building is in like incredible condition. Like for a multifamily property, one of the cleanest I've ever seen. You could tell it was really well kept. You could tell the tenants that they had were really good tenants. And I don't even think I don't think even at the beginning when I first walked it, I don't think I even knew that the nunnery owned it or that the tenants were nuns. But that made sense given the situation, because it's like, kind of had that little old lady type of vibe. Everything was organized, everything was clean. Basement was immaculate. I mean, you could literally eat off the floors in the basement. It was just, again, things you don't see in most multifamily. And so that tells you a lot about how they kept the property. And again, things that you can look for when you're walking deals. Like, I don't know. I think Brandon Turner says it's like what, like how you do anything is how you do everything. Is that what he says? Yeah. And I don't think that applies to every situation, but I think when you're looking at properties, it does give you a good indication of the condition.
yeah, I
We
mean
do that.
a lot of that comes with experience as well, right? Because I would say that I mean the other property that I own was built in 2007, right? So I had no experience handling or dealing with old, early 1900, late 1800 type of property, right? I'm a lot more comfortable walking them down, looking for things, right? Looking for knob and tube, etc. But I just needed to get a few reps in, I guess.
Yeah. Well, for sure. I mean, I think every deal anybody does, you're going to get better. I mean, not that you're going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. Things are going to fall through the cracks a little bit, but you're going to have more confidence. You're going to learn things from every deal you do. And like you were saying with the knob and tube, this is just a good example. That now is a niche for you going forward when you buy older properties, that you're going to have a competitive advantage, because a lot of buyers are going to be turned off on that. I think we even talked about that on the Norwood one we looked at. It's like, this is going to kill a lot of buyers, which then makes you more competitive, because you can go in there and do it if you have to do it. So you'll build those little experiences on every property you buy. And, and then once you've done a handful of deals, you for the most part become fearless, sometimes to a fault. But I know all you guys will get there as you keep growing. Eric, from an agent perspective, is there anything else you want to add? Like, things that you see, especially on the retail side, like in residential, what are some of the things that you always look for that you kind of warn your clients for?
Yeah, so I'd say like one of the things I was going to talk about was like just working with someone that's going to know your contingencies. There's a lot of agents in our market that don't actually understand like what the contingencies are, what they mean, how they're set up, or anything like that. We would never ask a client to waive inspections. I've never had a client waive inspections. But what we've always done inspections for informational purposes only. So if we're in a really competitive offer situation, we put 5 days as the first inspection number, which means we have 5 days to still flex that inspection muscle per se. We go in and find something that's really concerning to the buyers, we can back out. Most of the time right now with sellers, they're not going to make repairs. Make sure you're using a good inspector. The inspector I love. He also does like sewer scopes and stuff. And I recommend every single one of my clients do sewer scopes. One of my first buyers ever, when I was licensed as an agent, like 3 months into living in their property, the sewer backed up. So by like the grace of God, and their insurance covered it. But it was a $17,000 repair. But it was like a $500 deductible. So they called me when it first happened, and I called a couple of people, and I was like, well, it's going to be like a $10,000 to $15,000 repair, and it ended up being 17. Luckily, their insurance covered it. So now every single client, I'm like, make sure you get the sewer scoped or have insurance on a sewer line. Other than that, if you're talking about like lipstick on a pig for a flip, and Joe, kind of what you said, how you do one thing is how you do everything. If you're flipping a property and the small details aren't taken care of, I tell all of my clients immediately that means the big things aren't taken care of either. So if you go in and your caulking looks really bad, your paint is terrible, there's a bunch of small details that are really off, I tell my clients to expect that's how the rest of the flip went. And maybe that's unfair judgment, but to me, I'm trying to protect the client. So if I start to notice a lot of small details like that, kind of tells me what to expect going forward. Make sure the structure looks good if you're buying like residential. So I've had a couple deals go really poorly that way. One of the best ways to learn is when somebody like a Joe or somebody who knows what the hell they're doing goes out to a property. I'd say like half the stuff I learned, Joe probably doesn't even know it, but when I looked at properties with him, and everything he said, I just like absorbed like a sponge. And I just let him keep talking, and I would just wouldn't say anything. I was just like, dude, keep talking. I don't care. Go out there when you know there's people that are really smart and know what they're doing. Listen to everything they have to say, absorb it, ask questions, because that's going to help you in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point about inspections, like from the agent perspective, for me, I always, especially retail, I always tell my clients to get an inspection. Same thing. I have a good relationship with an inspector that I trust, and that's why I refer. Like, if people ask for an inspector, I refer him because that's who I would use when I buy. And certain properties I still get inspections on. But obviously, it's all situational. I've had clients waive inspections. I don't ever advise it, but if we're talking like prime COVID competition where they're getting 30, 40 offers. I had clients waive inspections, and that was their choice. And I gave them my feedback on it. But if they really want a property, there were some properties that that's what it took. And I haven't had anybody that like a lot of them were like newer, like $500,000-$600,000 properties. Like, it wasn't this type of stuff that is usually got some big hidden issue or something. But still, condos, I've had a lot of condo buyers waive because especially when all the exterior stuff is HOA covered
for the association.
Yeah. So I've had condo clients waive where they're only responsible for the inside walls, especially stuff that's built in like the last 10, 15 years, because it's like whatever.
We've also, like, sometimes we've had clients that have done like that did waive against our prerogative. And and we would still have the insurance. We would still have the inspector come out. Like they're offered to be no inspections. We'd still have the inspector come out, just say, tell the seller that they were, they had somebody coming out, family member or something like that, less than ideal. And it's not trying to be shady by any means, but something else. And this just recently changed, which kind of sucks. But we had a clause in our contract where you could back out if the insurance for the property was higher than you expected or affected your payment. So, I mean, we'd also kind of flex that too. So, like, if I had a client that waived it, I'd be like, look, have somebody walk it. Like, it can be anybody, like somebody you trust in your family. We'll go over the property, say we're measuring stuff. And then if there's something that comes up, we'll back out through the insurance clause. And we've only had to do that like once or twice. But it's like just trying to be able to protect your clients to the best of your ability. I owe the seller or whoever I'm representing, buyer or seller, I owe the other party no responsibility. I mean, I owe the agent fiduciary duty, but I'm trying to represent my client to the best of my ability. So understanding those kind of intricacies in the due diligence has helped us a ton. And it's kind of helped us with our clients be able to get out of weird situations, tricky situations, make sure that I'm covering their earnest money and getting it back and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of gray area in real estate and contracts, right? I mean, that's why there's attorneys' offices dedicated to nothing but real estate contract law, but there's ways to kind of bend the rules and protect yourself as a buyer or a seller. I try to be extremely transparent as an agent whenever I can, within whatever legal and ethical ability I have to do so. But yeah, there's times where deals just don't work out, and as an agent, you owe your duties to your client. So, who is that? There's that one agent that what's his name? He's like a big time New York agent, Ryan something.
Yeah, Sirhan.
Yes, yeah, I remember he was on a podcast, and he had his philosophy like, his what is it? It was like his loyalties to the deal or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, that's great in philosophy, but it's not great when it comes to representing your clients.
Ironically enough, that's how Florida works. You're not a broker of anything. We have what's called transactional brokerage down here. So your duty above all else, and we don't call them clients, they're customers down here, like everybody you work with. So your job is to ensure the contract goes through.
Wow. Okay.
And there's different ways you can do it. So you can still do the normal, and we do the normal fiduciary duty. You're my client. I plan on doing that down here. But there is a lot of agents down here that are strictly transactional brokers, which means they owe nothing to anybody. The only thing they owe is to make sure that the contract gets done and that they're not doing anything illegal or hiding anything like that.
Wow. So that's interesting.
Yeah. It's like the Wild West down here, which kind of sucks. Not a huge fan.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome, guys. Any other questions about due diligence? I know we covered a lot of different angles of it. I know I don't think anyone on this call is doing any like really big commercial stuff, at least right now. So obviously we could dive into that on another call if you guys would like to, but we could spend hours talking about just the nuance of commercial real estate due diligence. There's a lot of more complexities, more layers to it than residential. But if you guys have any specific questions about it, I'm happy to go over that, or we can move into the group discussion. All right, cool. Gage, you want to start us off on your goal updates? Nope, you might have froze. Angela, you want to go?
Yeah, I think he froze up. But not many updates from a couple of weeks ago. Still wanting to give me at least a couple more units this year. We've been going back and forth about our strategy going forward. Hey, do we want to buy something? We're at a point where more than likely our next purchase we got to put down 25%, right? And we can do that, right? And maybe we can do another one after that, right? But then after that second one, then we're going to be a little more limited, right? Or can we be a little more creative right now and think of other strategies, right? And think of also leveraging, gosh, the HELOC, and even, retirement accounts and things like that. Um, so kind of going over those options right now while I'm still working in my house hack. I mean, we moved in about a month ago now, and we haven't really unpacked. We got the mattress on the floor, and we got some suitcases with just enough clothes to go to work and go to the gym and all of that. And it is just fine, right? That's no problem. But we're cash flowing, right? That's really what's really motivating us right now. Everything's rented out, everything's cash flowing. So yeah, we just gotta tweak and really redefine our strategies for acquisitions going forward. I mean, really, we're already in the second half of 2023, I guess, and go from there. Everything else is going well. Savings are on track, cash flow. Yeah, I'm still a little behind on the reading if I go back to that my objectives, but I'm trying to catch up. I just got me a couple of books on, I mean, creative financing and things like that, but also more on like mindset and executions and things like that. And I know that Ash Patel mentioned rocket fuel last at the last meetup, so I'm probably gonna give that a try. That one sounds pretty interesting, so we'll see how it goes. That's what I got.
You said it was rocket fuel?
Rocket fuel. I think that's what
Yeah.
he said. I
Yeah,
think that's the
yeah.
one that covers like the integrator and then like the other person, which more like the visionary in a
I
way.
think so. I think it's the same author. I think Traction is like the first book, which is more
Okay.
about the integrator, visionary, all that stuff. Um, but I think Rocket Fuel was the second kind of follow-up book, which is more about like how you scale quickly in business and things like that.
Okay. So I may have to
Um,
read the one first then.
yeah, I just started rereading Traction. So I read it like 4 or 5 years ago, and I kind of forgot half of it. And
Yeah.
then I started rereading it because part of some of my business things I'm looking at really need more structural organization and things like that. That that book kind of outlines. So yeah, it's very topical for me right now too.
Cool.
Um, but as far as like strategy for you, man, I when I kind of put myself in your shoes, it's like maybe maybe the next logical step is doing like a burr, trying to find something that's a deeper rehab, maybe more like the properties we talked about when we looked at the Norwood one, something that needs that, taken from 0 to 100. And the reason why I say that is because, I know it's taking you some time now to save up this big chunk. And like you just said, you put it all in more of like a turnkey deal. Now it's tied up, long term.
Mhm.
So maybe it makes sense. Now you're getting a little bit more, your legs on your feet a little bit with these two properties you've done. Um, to take a leap and do a bigger, try to do a bigger rehab, and maybe even you GC it yourself, and try to hire subs, and you know what I mean. Take that next step where you get a little bit more involved in that rehab side of it, whether you're doing the work yourself or not, But
Right. No, I mean, I think, I mean, that's definitely one of the strategies that we've been kind of considering. To your point, maybe being involved to because I do have some flexibility at work and all of that. I don't think that I want to do a whole lot of the work myself, although I don't mind painting. I guess I can do that. I actually enjoy doing that. But yeah, it's one of those things that we are at a spot where we both got decent W-2 jobs. We both got decent savings, and we've been working professionally for a few years now, right? So it's like, yeah, we can buy maybe a couple more properties and then not have a whole lot of cash left to keep, and then we got to save up again, right? Right. But I mean, I think what you are saying makes a lot of sense. I think in a way it's a little more challenging just because it is something new, right? But I think from the risk reward is definitely much better in my opinion. And obviously you've done it over and over again, and I've talked to a bunch of other people at the meetups that have experience doing it, and that sounds like that's the way to go, especially if, because I do think that right now we have access to capital to finance a purchase and a rehab, right? Again, personal funds and HELOCs and things without really overstretching ourselves. So this may be the next logical step. So I mean, I appreciate that input for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, when I go back to 5, 6 years ago, when I started kind of hitting those burrs, and doing 1 or 2 deals a year like that, it really affects the way, I've heard the term like use like velocity of money. So meaning like how quickly can you compound that? And when you can rinse and repeat and try to get all or most of that capital out, that's just going to allow you to churn and burn those deals. And meanwhile, if you're still saving, you're still living frugally, you're already house hacking, so most of your bills are getting paid, all that good stuff. And as you start building more and more properties, more and more cash flow, in a couple of years, you do a couple of these every year, you're going to be in a totally different place where, you're financially free. But if you like your job, you want to stay in your job, or maybe you have some kids and that changes, your lifestyle, so it just gives you options. But I think where you're at and the experiences that you've had, it might make a lot of sense to really look at taking a leap into a big rehab. John, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool. You got updates for us?
Um, yeah, I was listening on and off to what you guys were saying. No real updates here. Just learning the process of working with different lenders and saving things on my computer to where they all need my tax returns, my K1s, my Schedule E, like all that stuff.
Yeah.
Third lender now that we're working with. So it's a learning process. So I'm glad to be able to learn what they want, for the future as well, even though maybe it didn't go my way with the first lender or whatnot. So that's a good learning process. No update as far as real estate, just waiting to see what happens with that deal. As far as the market being the way it is and not like how it was with 2012 to 2021, real estate is it seems to be like the slow game, of course, where people were skyrocketing to wealth a few years ago. Now it's kind of all those people fizzled out of the game. And it's just people really now that like real estate rather than people that have money and just throw it in. So I realize it's the slow game now, and it's something you'll do for 20, 30 years. So I'm also looking at other avenues too to make money, other business ventures and stuff that have nothing to do with real estate. Haven't found anything really that piques my interest. But that's something I like to do. Like I always said, want to have another business on the side where I can just plow that money into rentals and have both of them, to live off of, cash flow and stuff in case anything went wrong in my main business. But yeah, always open to look at new deals and everything, and no complaints here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that as far as like the real estate being the slow game, because I, for the longest time, had this philosophy where it's like, okay, every single penny I get, I'm going to put into real estate, and I'm going to try to do these bird deals, and I'm going to build up my cash flow. And that's going to be, I'm going to live off that money, right? I'm going to be financially free. And so I did that. But it's also like, as you scale up your lifestyle, I have almost, here in a couple of weeks, I'll have 3 kids. They're expensive. Bought a bigger house, more space. That's expensive. Vehicles, right? All that stuff. What I've learned is like, you can keep playing that cash flow game forever, and that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm going to continue doing that. But I think a mistake I made in my path that I'm just now realizing, literally in the last few months, is that had I invested some of that time and money into growing my businesses, then I could have exponentially grown my revenue, which would then allow me to buy more real estate, just like you're talking about. So it's like having a way to leverage your income that's not related to your time is obviously fundamental to wealth generation. But doing that via business, I'm realizing is probably the fastest way to really grow like meaningful wealth. And not that I haven't grown meaningful wealth in real estate. I'm not trying to downplay it. All I'm saying is like, I don't know what the number is. I'm just going to make up a number, but let's say I've invested $1 million. Okay. And off of that $1 million investment, I've created 2 million in equity. Okay. That's great. That's a home run. But had I invested that same $1 million in my businesses, I might have revenue right now of 10, 15, 20 million dollars. So you're not able to get that, you're not able to get that explosive growth just simply through buying properties and waiting, is all I'm trying to say. That's the point I'm trying to make. So
Yeah.
I know you guys are in W-2 jobs, and that's great. That's a great foundation to have. But I think as you guys continue your journeys and continue to buy more property and continue to generate wealth, you're going to reach that tipping point where you can go full time into real estate if you choose to. And that's when you'll have those opportunities to potentially grow your income exponentially, depending on what that looks like, you know. And that could be just a strictly investment business. Maybe you're wholesaling, maybe you're flipping houses. It could be completely unrelated to real estate. I know, John, you have like a sales business. You know, maybe you start your own sales business and you hire, 100 employees, and all of a sudden you're making, $100 million a year. Again, I'm just making up scenarios, but it's like, those are some of the things you'll be able to look at once you kind of hit that base level of financial freedom, because you now have the flexibility to take some of those risks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like I just sent a picture in chat. I don't know if you guys know who Ben Mallet is. He's a big time real estate investor in Florida. I think he's worth 250 million or something like that. He bought the biggest house in Tampa. I started out watching his videos in 2018. It's what got me really into real estate, because he's like a down to earth guy. He curses. He's like not what you expect from a rich person.
Okay.
I started watching his video and how he made his wealth, and he's like from garbage to gold. He would buy these places in the hood, started out in Oakland, California, buy these places for very cheap, 200K, fully, get tenants, everything, sell it for 2 million or something. And he's built that portfolio on and on since I think the late 80s till now. And I was watching his videos. I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. I could do this. I just don't know. And that's all he did. He wasn't a real estate agent, no other businesses. He's fully an investor, renovating, buying, and placing tenants, even in the hood where nobody wanted to go. He's got a lot of stories on his YouTube channel and stuff, entertaining YouTube channel, to say the least. But I don't know if that's possible now, starting with not starting with much, just the way the market is. Maybe he just happened to be at a time where the market was steadily going up, crashed in 2005, and then kind of went up again. I'm not sure if that's possible now to just be an investor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what type of strategy you're willing to do. And like, there's so many ways to make money in real estate, because like, I'll give you guys another example of something you two could do right now, where you don't have to necessarily have any money. You don't necessarily have to have any more experience, especially, than you already have. You guys could literally start, and I tell a lot of new, especially like young guys this, you could literally start pulling lists and cold calling or cold texting or sending letters to really desirable types of properties. Like elderly landlords is a like I talked about earlier, a list I love. And if you find an incredible deal on like a 50 unit, 75 unit, 100 unit, I guarantee you there's going to be experienced multifamily operators out there in almost any market that would partner with you in a heartbeat for you simply finding the deal. Even if you don't have it under contract. Now, I would suggest you get it under contract before you take it to somebody you don't know. But my point is, that's something that anyone could do. If they have a cell phone and a computer, a couple $100, you could do that. So again, that's just one example. It's not easy, but it is simple. And anybody could do that at really any experience level. All you're doing is talking to people. If you can talk to people, you can build rapport. You can find these deals like, so like Cincinnati market, obviously where all of us are operating right now. It's like, you find a multifamily deal where you can buy units like under 50K or even 50K a door. I guarantee you almost any multifamily guy I know would do that deal. You find 100 units for 5 million, they're going to be all over that. I mean, that's a home run deal. And that's like almost any neighborhood, that would make sense. So again, there's ways to scale even without not using your own money or not having a ton of experience. Just things to think about. But as far as my goals, quickly run through them. I think I mentioned last call, the city wanted permits on the Clifton apartments that we were working on. So that's kind of on hold, unfortunately, waiting on architects. I have a lot of major projects we're working on, waiting on architects, unfortunately. So it's very frustrating. It's been the biggest bottleneck in my construction business right now is waiting on architect plans. And I'm turning a couple units in my Eastgate building. Just happened to go vacant. There was like 4 total that we didn't renovate, and so we're doing 2 right now. Getting those leased up, and yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, everything sales have been pretty steady with real estate. The market's kind of seems like it's came back a little bit. Some of my clients that have bought properties are starting to kind of want to sell, and move into other properties. So I'm just picked up a few listings. I think I sent them to you guys actually already, but so it's good seeing some activity on the inventory side. People wanting to sell, and hopefully that trend will continue with the greater market, allow more opportunities out there. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I got. Next call will be on the 9th, unless I'm in the hospital with baby, which I probably will be, because we're supposed to get induced on the 8th unless she comes sooner. So it's very possible I won't be here, and I'll make sure to post in the group if I'm not able to make it. But yeah, she's ready to pop any day now, so we'll see when that comes.
Hey John, quick question for you. Did you end up picking a market? How's that going?
Yeah, I'm working with Joe now in Mount Washington.
Nice. Nice.
Um,
So basically Cincinnati area then, right?
yeah. Hmm.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty
say
decent area, I would say.
yeah, once we get done with his deal, we'll have to talk about it, because it's been we've definitely learned some things with some of the financing guidelines. That's why I said to switch lenders. Um, Seems like the lending standards have gotten a little more conservative. Banks are a little bit more skittish. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae have added some overlays that didn't exist even a couple years ago. So it's kind of interesting, some of the hoops we're jumping through right now.
So are you guys under contract right now?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Congratulations, brother.
Yeah, it's been a few weeks. It was so Nathan Millard in the group. I know he's been in here a few times. It's one of his buildings he's selling. So John's buying it, and
Nice.
but yeah, there's just some weird little guidelines right now that we can talk about, like I said, on another call. But it's been a good learning experience for both of us.
Cool.
Awesome, guys. Well, I may see you in a couple weeks. If not, keep working on your goals, and I will see you guys on the next one.
All right,
good.
guys.
See you.
Have a great night.
All right, you
Take
too. See
care.
you.